I'd like to thank you for having me speak today. I'm excited to be here. Just a little bit about myself. I'm from Ohio. I was born in Cleveland. I lived a lot of years in Ashtabula, and actually I lived right across the street from the Kent State branch in Ashtabula. And I don't remember such an amazing facility there, but took some summer courses there. So like Scott had mentioned early on, Ohio's it's my home state. We have a business here. I've been a business owner for 27 years. And I've been asked to talk about midstream and what it's going to be in 2020. And first thing I'll say is we are not a midstream company like Access, although we do quite a bit of work with Access. We are a consulting company, but trust me, what happens in 2020 is very important to us, especially with this industry. I mean, give you an idea, the last 10 auto plants I've worked on have been shuttered auto plants because of what happened to the industry. So it's really nice to work for an industry that's growing, expanding, and investing in our communities. Again, we're a consulting and development firm. Those are the markets that we're in, the top market being shale oil and gas. That actually came from an acquisition of a company that we made, a Pittsburgh-based company in 2009, who was very involved in the Marcellus. So we've had, the fortunate experience of seeing the Marcellus develop in the Utica, and I'm actually going to use that comparison a little bit today to talk about midstream in our region, because what really happens with the whole industry is there's so many things that affect it, as you know, just commodity pricing, for example. I just read an article in the Wall Street. They compared a winter from, November, December, January 2000 to 2001. Gas went from $4 to over $10. And this cold snap we just had, which was much colder, it went from just under 4 to 5, much more stable. And while storage is down, there's like 1 trillion cubic feet more storage available right now than we had back then. So a change like that, I think Scott had mentioned exporting natural gas, and 6% of the LNG freighters can fit through the Panama right now. When it's expanded, 90. So there's a lot of things out there with exports and a lot of things that will eventually trickle down to any of the plays in our country. There's a lot smarter people that think about that than certainly me. So I'm going to try to focus on what's happening here and how it's going to affect, again, midstream in 2020. So if you look at our markets, a really good example, waste management. We've designed 50 landfills in the last 30 years and have done recycling and just everything that has to do with waste. And one of our biggest emphasis right now is working with upstream producers trying to manage responsibly and cost-effectively drilling waste. So again, a lot of the things that all of us business owners have done for many years have applicability when you get indirect, direct, indirect, and further down the line. David Mustine, who will speak a little bit later today, gave me this, and I think at the time he was short-term when he was director of ODNR, but I really like it because it shows, I'm talking about midstream. Later you're going to hear about demand. We talk about, is this a generational business, is it a boom or it's a bust? You have to look at everything that supports it, and I know you've heard that at many talks, the aggregates, the concrete, the steel pipe, the restaurants, the lodging. But again, the way we look at it and how it's going to be in 2020, we have to look at all those support industries too, because we work with those support industries, and that's how our business is going to be sustained. Just one other thing I'd like to mention. When we look at an asset for any of the industries in, whether it's a building or a road, but let's just talk about oil and gas. If it's a well, if it's a pipeline, if it's a processing facility, there's really multiple stages. There's a life cycle. Right now, it's exciting. It's all CapEx, capital expenditures, big expenses to plan, design, and construct. And that's what you're seeing. And that's exciting. And that will be around, I believe, in 2020. And I'll talk about that in a little while. But there's also, these facilities have to be operated, maintained, they'll be modified, they'll be changed. While it might not be the same capital expenditure, it is an industry, and is one that we're certainly focusing on. And then further down the line, there's a lot of mergers and acquisitions and investments. That's already happening right now with acreages being switched and new investments in midstream assets that are already there. Those all take certain types of services that we provide. So again, if you look at the whole supply chain, the markets you're in, as well as a life cycle of everything we're talking about, it's well beyond 2020, and depending on the demand, it definitely will be generational. Okay, so I'd like to start with a comparison here. What's midstream in 2020, and how does it affect our region? So if we look at what's happened in Pennsylvania and Ohio, just from the upstream, this is a quick snapshot. There are almost 10,000 wells installed, order of magnitude higher than us. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say, with all those hydrocarbons coming out of the ground, you need pipes to take it someplace and a place to process it. So as we put in more of the upstream assets, more of the midstream will continue to go. I think most people would say upstream is going to be very, very busy for the next 4, 5, 6 years, depending on, again, the market and how things happen. So if that continues to increase, midstream is always trying to catch up to it. So that's the first point about midstream and what it'll be like in 2020. It's almost intuitive that it'll be a strong industry. If you look at just pipelines, so what they have in Pennsylvania versus here, from interstate and distribution, everything's pretty good. But you look at those gathering lines, and I think my number on Ohio is probably low. That was a few months ago. But again, an order of magnitude more lines to support the Marcellus than we have here. So more lines means more product, means more processing that has to go someplace. So again, intuitively, we know that this market is going to be around. It's going to peak in a few years. Yes, it'll taper off. But again, looking at the life cycle, there'll be a continued industry there. This is a great article on Utica catching up to the Marcellus and what it means from a midstream perspective. And Hard Energy, that puts this out, also puts on a lot of conferences. And it just so happened this Wednesday and Thursday was the midstream conference in Pittsburgh. And so some of the numbers that we heard, if you're just looking at sheer numbers, is midstream expenses in the Appalachian Basin, so West Virginia, Western PA, and Eastern Ohio, $12 to $14 billion average per year till 2020, peaking sometime between 15 and 16. Now, I'm sure people have better numbers than that, but that was one midstream company, and that's what they felt that would be spent. That's a lot of expenses, and that is in direct and indirect as far as construction and hauling, but it does not get down to anything that would come off of that. So that was the numbers from that conference. The conference is very bullish. A lot of the comments that Scott made were made at that conference also as far as the Utica, what they're starting to see, even though it's still early. Now, I use this comparison in Harrisburg and Philadelphia the week before the game. So I didn't have the score on there. And the reason I brought this up is kind of a joke, obviously, because if you give a talk in Philadelphia, any place east of the Pennsylvania line, they are very Marcellus-centric. They believe the oil and gas industry stops at the border. So I figured, well, come on, it's a real regional thing. We're all friends here. And we actually cheered for Penn State in the fourth quarter when they were beating Michigan this year. So never went over big, but I figured I could put the score on today for everyone here. I think I'm pretty safe. But really the point I tried to make with that, if you look at this map, again, from this magazine, it is a regional issue, right? I mean, you see a lot of pipelines, there's a lot of development. The only lines that are blurred there are the state lines. So it's regional, your opportunities are outside just Ohio when it comes to midstream. I mean, we're working on projects cross state lines, you have different regulatory agencies, you have different operators, different speeds that things are happening. But it's just being able to be nimble because everything changes quite a bit. Here's just another look at midstream infrastructure. And I apologize you can't see this, and if you want to, give me your card, I'll email it to you. These are projects, the ones Scott mentioned, ones that have been announced, ones that are under construction. Some might happen, some might not, many are, but this shows midstream projects, primarily cryogenics or processing facilities, fractionation facilities, large compression facilities. And we've tried to keep tabs on this with other people just to kind of give you an idea of the expenditures that are happening. And there's numbers on there, some of it's from the news, some of it's from announcements and things like that. But again, this has not all been done. It's going to take a lot of years to get a lot of these projects online. Okay, one thing I wanted to do, being an engineer, I have to have a few charts and graphs and kind of get to the idea of, there's a lot of people that are going to talk later on about demand, but so I basically said, yeah, midstream will be strong in 2020, even on the capital expenditure side, but what it looks like, a lot's going to depend on what happens to the demand in our region. How much of the hydrocarbons are going to stay here and how much are going to go away? So a really good example, I just wanted to focus on ethane real quick. So you have the wellhead, all the stuff comes out of the ground, you take off the gas, I'm making it very simple, and then you take all these liquids to our fractionation plants, and you get things like propane. Well, we know all about propane, right? Big propane shortage right now. Butane, we know what butane does. Natural gasoline or a condensate, there's a lot of issues going on with that. That's something I'm sure we'll talk about today. But ethane by itself is kind of a pain for people to deal with. Because ethane as alone, you've probably heard, there's not too many things you can do with just ethane unless you crack it, right? So this is a cracker. This is an ethane cracker in Port Arthur. They are multi-billion-dollar investments. What that ethane cracker does is it makes ethylene, and then ethylene can make polyethylene, and then you can make all kinds of things like polystyrene and all kinds of products like you see here, anything that's plastic. I mean, we have a huge plastics and polymer industry in Ohio. So how much of that stays here? And it really gets, this is a really good depiction. Everything on this, except for the people themselves, have something that came out of ethane. This is from a household, I believe it's in Ohio. I took this picture, I actually got it from API, but you can just imagine things that can be manufactured and the job creation that can happen if a lot of the hydrocarbons stay in our region. But here's kind of the dilemma. When we talk about midstream infrastructure and projects, there's a lot of projects trying to get ethane down to the Gulf Coast because the Gulf Coast has a very, very huge invested chemical processing facility down there in Mount Bellevue. They have Houston, they have the Port of Houston, Louisiana, they can ship. They do have hurricanes, they have their issues. You have ethane going up to Sarnia, Michigan. You have ethane going to Philadelphia to be taken, to be exported. We know that Shell, you probably have read that they announced one in Beaver County. Whether it goes, we don't really know. There was one, the Ascent project that was just announced by a Brazilian company. Pretty early on, we heard they closed on the land. Don't know what it means, but this is down in West Virginia. Again, rich chemical heritage through the Kanawha Valley. So a lot of it depends, while the midstream will be here, how much of it is going to be taking it away and how much is going to be for projects that we can create and demand we can create in the Midwest. Downstream activity, other people are going to talk about this, but these are the type of projects we need. You've probably read where AEP and First Energy is retiring a lot of coal generation facilities to be replaced with natural gas. NTE Energy just announced a 500 megawatt facility in Middletown, Ohio, on the western edge. There's a 20,000 barrel gas to liquids facility in Ashtabula announced. Again, all announced, not necessarily up and running, but we're starting to see the demand. Even the owner of the Browns, Jenny Halsum, wants to put LNG for long haul at all the pilot facilities that he owns on the turnpike and stuff. So creating demand is very important. That's going to definitely shape what midstream looks like, but it's certainly not going to slow down the investment in midstream. A lot of times someone will say, we've announced this project, and then you'll hear it's on hold because we're trying to figure out what's going on with their contracts and things. All right, so what does it all mean? There really are a lot of questions. I mean, from a company who's been here for 30 years and has made an investment in the market, we believe it's going to be very strong in 2020. I think upstream and midstream, they're going to follow each other. I think they'll peak sometime in the next 5 years. Again, how much they peak from year to year depends on a lot of the market things that you'll hear about later on. But I do think it's going to be strong. I think if you consider that there's more to just building an asset, and there's a lot of opportunities in the whole life cycle of an asset, and if you consider the whole supply chain. I mean, right now, there's more and more exploration going on and a lot of effort on trying to reduce the cost of that. So figuring out ways to help the industry in Appalachian Basin and Eastern Ohio figure out how to do this cost effectively while the commodity price is along, they can still be competitive and get the return from these assets. This is just a little bit about how we're doing our part for the demand. We have started converting our vehicles. They are biofuels because unfortunately there's not enough CNG facilities where we travel, but we use it as much as we can and we'll continue to buy biofuel trucks. Our alternative energy group is spending a lot of time doing combined heat and power projects, cogen projects, small, 250 megawatt to a megawatt, but when you can predict inexpensive natural gas over a contract, an energy contract, and turn it into energy and a heat stream, starts becoming really competitive, and things like distributed generations for universities is something you'll see a lot of in the next 5 to 10 years. It's a game changer, the whole industry is, from anything I've ever seen as an owner of an engineering firm. I think we should all be very excited about it. I know it's been around for a couple of years, but every day this industry changes, and I believe that, again, 2020, upstream, even though I'm not talking about it, midstream, and if the demand comes, this is certainly a generational industry. So, thank you.